Dr. Jason Tham. It's an honor to have you. He is the associate professor in technical communication and rhetoric and the assistant department chair of the English department, I believe.
Yes.
Good, that's still current. And his research and teaching focuses on design thinking, user experience and UX design, informational design, digital rhetoric, and collaborative co-learning. And he has edited and authored prolifically 7 books and many articles. And his newest book is Keywords in Making a Rhetorical Primer. When is that going to be available? Is that already published yet? Yes, it is.
Yes. It's
Great.
just been published this summer through Parlor Press.
Awesome.
Mhm.
I guess that's all I had. He wanted me to make it short so he had more time to talk. So go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate that. Hello, everybody. I'm Jason, and I wish I could come to Illinois. I've actually never been to Urbana-Champaign, so but thanks for having me here at your professional development workshop. And I am glad to talk about AI with you. I have a lot of content to cover, and so I'll be speeding a little bit, but I will be staying back for a conversation or questions if you have later on, and hopefully we'll get something out of this. So first, I do want to acknowledge the land that I work and live on. We have the territory of the native people, as well as resources that you will see at throughout this presentation. And I want to acknowledge some of the sources for these materials, including my university's TLPDC and some of my collaborators, research collaborators, and teaching collaborators who have helped generated some of these content, including community resources that are linked here that you can access later on after this presentation. As mentioned, this slide set will be distributed after the presentation. There are a lot of materials linked in here that I would encourage you to check out afterwards. All right. So just a quick overview of what I hope to cover today in the hour. I want to talk a little bit about some concepts and theories guiding my own thinking of generative AI and augmentation in writing and technical communication, and to give you some examples of the AI applications that I'm familiar with, and hopefully you are as well. You probably have heard many of them in public discourses, as well as your own students or perhaps at your institution as well. And then I want to do a little gesture to thinking about design as an approach to attending to generative AI through our pedagogy. So I'll be talking a little bit about instructional design and student-centered pedagogy, and how a design thinking mindset can help us get there to understanding student needs and creating pedagogies that will attend to their to those needs. So let's start with some concepts and philosophies, if you will. I do want to position myself as somebody coming from a training, educational background, and technical communication and rhetoric. I got my degree from the University of Minnesota in a Department of Writing Studies, and so a lot of how I think about technology comes from that sort of tradition, as well as my own teacherly reflection as somebody from teaching in a classroom or hybrid or online, how my students have reacted to different kinds of technologies that they're exposed to while composing text. And then my own kind of interest, both in teaching and research, that has to do with design as a practice, design as a mode of engagement with communication. So I've screenshotted some of the covers from my books here that mentioned by Hillary here, that you might want to check out if you're interested in this design mindset called design thinking. All right. Some motivation. So in the title that I gave to Hillary for this presentation, I mentioned augmentation because I didn't really want to get too set on just focusing on AI as the most recent phenomenon, if you will, about uh, writing technology, although it is. But I think augmentation has been around to automate or to facilitate writing processes for a long time, ever since computers were brought into our classrooms, our teaching practices, and student writing processes. So I do want to acknowledge that it is there, and that it is an evolution rather than a revolution to the way we should be thinking about writing technologies. But also, as we think about augmentative practices, I think it is important to consider some factors that motivates that sort of approach. So one, I think many of us consider writing as not just an activity, but also labor. As teachers, we all know very well that writing consumes energy, time, effort, right? And for students as well, they might see it as something to do rather than a voluntary activity that they participate in. The second factor here is to consider the benefits or the availability of big data as affording different layers of meaning making for communicators and writers. So thinking about, I think pertaining to our work here are perhaps some of the data that we could get from institutions or program-wide assessments that will allow us to better understand student performance or engagement or even their preferences in learning. I think some of these things are important for us to remember that technology affords this layer of meaning that otherwise may not be available to us if we follow only a traditional mode of composing or teaching. And the third factor that I think it's important here is to consider the logics of invention. So as we know, invention being a core canon of rhetoric, or some call it the first canon. I think it is important to think of the motivations, influences, or different conditions um, that help us consider how we create change or how we use technology to achieve different purposes. And in the public domain, some of those motivation might come in the form of profit making or social change. And some even would think about like justice oriented change making. But we do have to consider the influence of technology and its intersection with our motivation as we think about how technology can be used to write and to communicate. And finally, as most digital rhetoricians or teachers of writing would agree, that writing and communication are always already mediated today as we think about the different modes, modalities, and even materialities of writing and how new or emerging technologies can help augment that those three that we're considering here. So, and I also want to address the virtual elephant in the room, right? I think a lot of us as writers, again, thinking back about the economies of writing, writing as labor, writing as a resource required activity, that sometimes I would consider, for lack of a way of saying it, the easier way out, right? If I could find something that could speed up the process or to make it easier, more enjoyable for me to compose, why not, right? Why do something the difficult way if it is not a required part of that process? So I would want, if I had AI as a student, I think I would really try it out. I would want it to be easy to use. I would want it to be really helpful in doing my assignments or in producing writing. I would want to spend my time doing something else that I really enjoy other than writing essays. So that's something that I think we want to acknowledge as the practical kind of scenarios that we're dealing with in our classroom. That even when we're thinking about the ethics and the ideals of learning and learning to write, the reality out there is that writing takes time, writing takes effort and energy, and that sometimes we would want something to help make that process more enjoyable and more efficient, right? And technology comes into play. Some other philosophies, and I want to speak through this. Like I said, these are all linked in the slide that you can refer to later. But I do want us to perhaps dissociate from a discourse of crisis that we sometimes think of when AI comes into the conversation. And we don't want to always think of it as disruptive from a negative standpoint, but rather in a productive, meaningful way. Learning from what we already have produced in the body of scholarship, especially from the community of computers writing, digital rhetoric, or composition studies at large. There are a lot of knowledge there that we can draw from, even though the technology is different. But the idea behind the use of technology in teaching and pedagogy is transferable. Right. And also putting on my technical communicator hat, I will also consider opportunities for us to contribute to the future of technology, not just as user, but designers and developers of those future technologies. And a little bit more about, of course, the rhetorical aspect of technology. Again, these are some of the references I think a lot of you would recognize, from Miller to Self and Self, to Cass, Haraway, and Feinberg, that touches on different aspects on the rhetorical nature of technology that I think we all have accepted, and that influence the way we think about how technology should or should not be used for different purposes. So if you consider the politics of technology, how it's designed to facilitate particular kinds of interaction, and a lot of the ethical concerns with technology has to do with expediency, efficiency, and thinking about the cultural impact of technology, how they're designed by certain groups of people for certain groups of people, and how it might marginalize some of users, right, who could use the technology to facilitate their lives or their work. All right, now I'm moving into the quick rundown of the applications that y'all are familiar with, but just to give us put us on the same page when we talk about generative AI. But before I get there, awareness, I think it's one of the things that we don't talk enough about AI today. And according to this Pew Research Center study that was just done last year, they're still doing the study this year, but they don't have their report published yet because the year hasn't is not over. But based on our latest result, they noticed that people are not actually as aware as they should be on how embedded AI is in their everyday technological life. If you use any of these features, you're already engaging with AI features in some capacity, like your email spam filters, songs or movie recommendation systems, any at all smart home applications, including your security system. And if you are like me, who is big on like personal wearables, like fitness trackers, any of those health data producing devices, as well as this is probably one that people are that people recognize most, the chatbots that they engage with either on the phone or on a website when it comes to engaging with businesses or with customer service. So just to put an idea out here, that not everyone has the same level of awareness about their engagement with AI. And I think it'll be interesting to have this conversation with students as well, to ask them about their media engagement and their technology engagement, and how AI sort of are already a part of their lives, whether or not they see it as an active agent that influence their writing or communicative activities, or something that is just that they might not even think of. And I also want to, this again may not be new to many of you, but the idea of the hype cycle popularized by Gartner, who created this way of thinking about technology diffusion and public acceptance of technology, especially when they are considered disruptive or emergent technologies that hasn't been yet a commonplace technology in our lives. So you can see where in this year that generative AI sits on this in between the peak of inflated expectations and the trough of disillusionment, if you will. That takes multiple years to actually get through. And I, in fact, noticed that the change of temperature in our conversation about AI compared to, say, early 2023 and mid 2023, with the evolution of ChatGPT, and now given a more level marketplace AI technologies that people can choose from, or that they're becoming more embedded. And I'll show you some examples later on that you will recognize. They are becoming more socially accepted. And what that means, I think, for us as writing teachers, is to consider how students are maybe already been familiar or comfortable even with using some of these applications. And you would notice there are others that are just still emerging, or is taking a long time, say the navy blue bubbles here, the 5 to 10 years technologies that will take a while to get through acceptance in the public sphere, that perhaps in the next couple of years we'll see a different placement on that cycle. Now, going just a few steps back, you will recognize some of these quote unquote disruptive learning technologies that writing teachers were really concerned about in the past decade. And thanks to the emergence of social media and search engines and crowdsourcing technologies, we're seeing these things that have influenced the way we talk about pedagogy, right? The way we talk about ethics of learning and what counts and does not count as plagiarism, academic integrity, honesty, dishonesty, questions such as these. And that today, those conversations have shifted, right? That we no longer are as opposed, I would say, to the presence of these technologies in the writing process or in the learning process, and more so accepting them as part of life, that students would just need to develop that sort of literacy in order to use them in a productive and meaningful way, right? In fact, 4C even has like a Wikipedia writing campaign slash funded activity that teachers can enroll in and teach with Wikipedia. And so all that is to say that I think my projection for this, for generative AI, is that it will soon join this rank of older disruptive learning technologies in the next couple of years, when we are just going to be more accepting of their presence, and should not be ignoring that they are, in fact, an everyday technology. For those who teach technical communication or design, these other examples might even also speak to your recognition here. So there, for example, the shift from pure coding to what you see, what you get, sort of layout design, drag and drop features, or template driven design. I don't know how many of you have taught, like, say, a document design course where you no longer require students to learn how to do layers, or how to use InDesign, PageMaker, Photoshop to build documents from scratch, right? You might be allowing them to follow templates or to use existing color palettes to build their documents that you're asking them to create, because the sort of literacy that you're asking them to develop may not be focused as much on the functional aspect, the how to build something, but rather the why, right? Choices that we make, rhetorical choices that we make in creating communicative documents or artifacts such as this. So I feel that the the influence of AI is going to look quite similar to this particular phenomenon, where we are perhaps shifting away from writing as functional activity to writing even more as a rhetorical decision-making process, where we choose whether parts or certain aspects of writing would be automated, how and why we make those choices would be at the core of our pedagogy. And that's my projection. And I waited till like yesterday to update the slides, because every day I seem to just get new examples that is coming out from the marketplace of AI. And these are not super new, but they're relatively new compared to what we have, say, 2 months ago. So some of you may already have been using the Google search feature, where they provide an AI overview to your queries. Whether you turn it off or ignore them, they are there. And people are getting more and more used to it, right? This is the kind of diffusion of technologies that I'm talking about, where people are becoming more and more accepting of them because they're present, and that they are just kind of running in the background whether or not you are asking for it. So there's the AI overview example. We are now using Zoom, and later on you're going to get a Zoom summary with chapter highlights from the recording that you can use if you want to, or ignore if you don't want to use them, right? But they are AI supported, very much at the forefront of generative or AI application. And then the one that affects my teaching most, especially in the design world, is the generative fill feature on design software like application Adobe Photoshop or InDesign, where just like generative text AI, the visual generative fill can allow students to use textual prompts or provide contextual examples, say borrow another picture and say build something like this, right? To create modified imageries that would look like they were original. So of course this one here looks pretty much modified, but you see what I'm trying to say here with those features. And just a few days ago, right, Apple announced their latest phone that will come fully embedded with AI, but what they call Apple Intelligence, that will have different features, again, running in the background of this technology that we'll carry in our pocket. And I'm pretty sure, even if you're not an Apple user, your other operating systems are going to follow suit, right? Or that they already have AI capacity embedded, just that they may not be calling attention to it, and or that we're not aware of them. So things like making summaries, creating text prompted images, or I've just updated, even though the phone isn't here yet, but the iOS for this version of the phone is already available. So if you have already updated to it, you notice that if you have an event, you get a special alarm that is set up for you. It notices if it's in the morning before your regular wake up time. It will give you a prompt for that. Things that will help organize your life, again, with this sort of smart artificial features. And then circling back to textual generative capacity, none of these are super new to us. When I first gave a presentation like this, Google's AI was still called something else. It was called BARD or something like that. So they have since updated it. But there are a lot of options in the marketplace of generative AI that if students want to use, they have options, right? And teachers as well, depending on what their goals are. So I just listed some of them here. And just to give us some language to talk about AI. I don't know how familiar we are with the workings of AI. And after all, I don't think any of us are AI engineers or designers. We use the technology, but I think we have the responsibility to at least know how it works, just so we can explain it to students, and or we can use it to our advantage or objectives, right? So machine learning is one term that you'll probably hear a lot. It is under the umbrella of artificial intelligence, but it is not artificial intelligence itself. So when we talk about machine learning, we're referring to a kind of programming that teaches the computer to learn to do tasks on its own. So it's literally what the term itself refers to. It's teaching a machine to learn. It's a set of programs that allow the parsing of data to understand what the data is referring to, and then how to use that memory, right? The learning from that data set to attend to future task. All right. And I have an example here that I'll talk through once I get through the language here. So large language model, it's another term that you hear a lot especially when we're talking about generative AI, textual generative especially, that is based off of a particular learning model that allows for understanding of plain language text. So when we say plain language, we're referring to human way of talking rather than system language. So if you look into, say, the back of a website in codes, they are in a different kinds of grammatical or structural rules than how human would typically talk. A large language model borrows from a large set of human plain language models in order to inform this way of programming that allows for machine to understand what is it that a person is talking about when they refer to X in a particular way or in a particular context. And then GPT simply stands for generative pre-trained transformer. It's a more specific type of learning model that allows for the generation of output based on the machine's understanding of human language. So together, all this creates what we know as the textual generative AI today. They all work together in order to provide the kind of output that you see from applications like ChatGPT or Google Gemini. So here's a very simplistic flow representing a visual representation of that process. On the left, before the application of machine learning or artificial intelligence processes, computer programmers can create algorithm that helps us expedite analysis or analytic processes. So here's one example. So with the input of data and rules or conventions, the algorithm can then sort through the data to create output or answers to our questions. So for example, if you want to know if, say, let's go back to our spam email filtering system example. It is a simple algorithm that helps differentiate spam from non-spam emails, right? So how that works is that by taking a whole lot of data, i.e., both spam and non-spam email, and by applying the rules that say spam emails tend to have spelling errors, or they tend to have language that urges people to do something, actionable terms, or language that seems to sell, for example. So if we apply those rules, then following the if-then structure, right, the algorithm can then quickly screen through all of the spam, non-spam email and identify those that have these three criteria and mark them as likely spam, right? And the more they do, the better they are at doing it, right? So that's how algorithm works. But when you apply artificial intelligence or machine learning models, what happens is that instead of just creating static rules, we are now creating a dynamic sort of feedback to the machine so that it learns that it's not just these three criteria. There are other things that make for a spam email as well. A spam email might also look like this if it is selling X. It might also look like that if it is doing Y. So with human input, with human sort of correction, right, to the output, it learns to do a better job and create new rules on its own. So these new rules is what makes it artificial, is that it's thinking on its own. It's creating new parameters. It is telling its own algorithm, its own program that, all right, so it's not just spelling errors, it's not just urgency, it's not just promotional language, but also if it has like too much red colors in this email or too much links or too, whatever, right? All of these things that humans are telling the programs that such and such is also a spam, then it adds to its knowledge bank. It adds to its understanding of what spam might look like, and then in itself then create new answers, new set of rules that create new output. Hopefully that makes sense. I hope that's a more everyday example that we all can kind of relate to, that we don't think about. I mean, sometimes we just think spam goes into the spam box, but there's this process that happens before it goes there. So, uh, and just a little bit more on textual generative AI. So as you all know, it's based off of existing data set. So we call these a corpus of written data, right? And we use that as an initial sort of model for training these programs to understand here's what an essay looks like, which is why your most early version of AI generated text all looks like 5 paragraph essays, because that's what we feed it with, and or that it's available to them. We may not have actively given them those examples, but they were published, right? They were online, they're available, and they were the ones that are scraped by programmers to train their models. You can certainly create your own AI and use your own set of data to train them, and they would generate very different looking essays based on what you provide. And essentially, how it works is just like writing an email. When you type in a word, it gives you the next following like predictive text. AI creates word, well, essentially letters by letters, but what we see it's word for word, word after word, to based on association of meaning. So it is trying to make sense of what you're trying to say by picking the most likely word following the previous word. So because it happens so fast, we think of it as like, oh, it's thinking, but it's not. It's just choosing. So it's mostly statistical. It's not really meaningful thinking on the AI part. And one last thing about generative. So what makes generative AI, especially things like Chat GPT, seemingly disruptive? It's the chat aspect of the AI feature. A lot of the even in the previous example, the spam example that I've given you, we don't really actively provide input, right? I mean, you might have like a rating system. You might tell your inbox, did it do a good job like marking spam, or that you have the option of moving spam back into an inbox, right? That motion tells the program that it did something wrong, right? It has mistakenly identified something as spam while it's not supposed to be, right? That's an indicator, but we're not actively we're not chatting with it and saying, oh, today you did a good job marking all of my spam emails, right? But the chat feature in applications like ChatGPT or others like Google Gemini or Claude allows for us to have a more engaged and active presence in the AI process. And so it will learn better. with our human feedback. So this sort of reinforcement learning, it's almost like having a student in front of you and actively working with them, with their working through the thinking, versus writing, a weekly update on, here's what you've learned last week. Was it good? No? Okay, now here, let's try something else. But this is sort of like in the moment, real-time exchange that help facilitate that kind of learning. So, and the conversations that we have, we call them feedback, answers, or whatever. They see us, the human user, as trainers, and that's one of the ethical aspect of AI existence that I think is largely critique, right? Is the labor involved in providing free training that people may or may not know that they are actively doing, right? Whenever you like something, or whenever you tell the AI that it's doing something to your desire or not, you're training it. You're telling it how to do better next time. So, some examples that I wanted to share earlier, I asked what your institutional kind of approach is to generative AI. I have some examples here that I think I would leave it to your own reading later on for inspiration. Most of these come from my own institution, but there are also some largely community-based examples that I think would be helpful to kind of look at. So first, we have our own professional development centers resource that gives us some language on how to talk about AI and its use in teaching and learning. And our TLPDC takes a traffic-like approach. So it's red, yellow, green. You either the teacher can say, yes, go all full out. We don't care if you use AI or not. We don't care if you credit them or not. Play with it. It's going to be there for in the near future. There's no concern at all. And yellow, as you would imagine, is the with caution, right? So we would ask students to think really carefully about their use, as well as teachers, and to have some kind of moderation in the use of that in a classroom. And red will be the banning, right? The no, and say, stop, you can't do this in this particular class because it does not apply, right? So one thing I can think of perhaps is my colleagues in like the dance department. They would say, well, you're not producing any written or graphical or anything work. We would just have this red light policy on AI altogether. You can't use it to choreograph. You can, whatever, right? So different teachers have different options that they can choose from, but those are the three main policy guidelines that we have. We don't have mandates at the university just yet, but they have these guidelines and provide training to teachers on which one to choose based on the course objectives. If you want to look at some examples for writing related assignments that teach with and without AI, I recommend clicking through some of these links that give students options that they can use or not use AI to produce the same assignment. All right, so I think those are helpful. Others, I want to call attention to this one resource called the Station Syllabus Project that provides a list of language for creating guidelines and heuristics. Even though I plan on also doing a similar exercise later on with you, but this is one that has more extensive commentary as well as reactions by those who have tried this, and examples that they produce that are archived on this website that I recommend you checking it out for your own inspiration. For any of us who also publish in the field, there are guidelines that I'm starting to notice that are becoming more apparent with publishers and presses on the use and crediting of AI as part of the writing or the research process. I mean, AI can also be used to do things like data analysis, running content analysis and things like that. So how to declare those kind of use are provided by some of the publishers, for example. This was actually from earlier this year where ACM was simply running a survey. It doesn't even know what it wants yet. And ACM is one of the largest publisher in in technology world. So a lot of TechCom folks are associated with that. And I just thought that was interesting that even a leading organization has not made up their mind about AI policies. And I'm running a search this year. So I just came back from a search committee training where they also provided guidelines on how to engage with AI in some of these administrative processes. So I think it is important for us to think outside of the classroom context as well. So it's not just teaching and learning, but also how we do our work at the program, department, and even university level. And even beyond, thinking about the country, right? Nationally, how what's the stance taken toward AI and the ethics around the development of this technology? What are some of the guiding principles that as citizens that we should be aware of and that we should have rights to, right? Think about as users, as human engaging with technologies that have potential risk and harm in our lives. So I'll recommend checking that Bill of Rights blueprint as well. Some examples that I came across from the workplace, I thought are also worth mentioning how practitioners have mentioned their use of AI in doing their job. And I feel that this is probably one that students are most interested in learning. They want to know, once I get out, right, when I finish my degree program, when I graduate, what is expected of me? What in the workplace will I be asked to use or will I be banned on using AI? So it's always fascinating to hear from industry practitioners on how they're engaging with this. But based on my reading and listening to some of these narratives, the majority of the situation is mostly personal choices. So you get practitioners choosing to use AI as part of their workflow, but they will have to get approval, especially when they're dealing with high sensitive information, proprietary, products and services where they are not allowed to share certain details with AI. But in other times when they're just seeking available, say information like defining something, they're certainly allowed to use AI to expedite some of those processes or to enrich that process. For example, in this case, this practitioner used an AI to create inspiration, right? Trying to get a sense of what she would be able to write in a list topics related to X. So another thing to check out, I guess. And finally, I would also mention I come from the technical and design world where a lot of boot camps are available to non-degree seeking students or practitioners who are looking to develop new skills. There are all these certification boot camps that are available to even students can sign up for them. Some of them are free, where they can learn the integration of AI. And I thought we need to be aware of these as teachers as well, because they either would supplement student learning or whatever we say in the classroom sometimes might go against some of the teaching that is provided by industry practitioners. So here are just some examples in UX writing, for example, how to use generative content to create websites, apps, build personas. I will give you some examples on steps later on pertaining to this particular UX process. There are also new roles that I'm noticing from industry, new job titles that that addresses the need for working with AI. For example, technical editors who now would edit or write with AI generated text. And they charge, as you can see, accordingly per hour. So those are things that I would recommend that you check out. So the final part of this in the remaining time, I just want to walk through the design approach. Earlier mentioned, I'm trained from the technical writing and communication tradition. A lot of what I do is informed by this designer mindset. So even with thinking about the engagement with composing with technology, so when I was coming up with the title for this talk, I thought about what if I walk through all of the canons, from invention to delivery. Of course, I did not do that, but I do want to cover like these things as they are pertaining to writing activities, communication activities, and how technology plays a part in these canons, right? So from use to invention to arrangement, style and delivery, and memory, and in the age of technology, of course, also data and information. And designing with technology means, for me, using available means for these stages or phases of writing, as well as to present them and to deliver them. So in what ways do AI fit into these parts of our canons, right? And I think design can provide some of that answer. First, to use design as a lens for, I actually address the second point first, problem solving, right? We design so that we can address something either to enhance a particular experience or to address a problem or an issue that needs solution, right? So design as a way of coming up with something new. Design could also be, to this first point, a way of managing something. So thinking about tactical or functional strategic management, right? How design can be used to control our workflow or to add to our workflow, typically to enhance it, right? No one wants to design to make something worse. So thinking about that aspect, but also the science of design, which involves thinking about the protocols or the systematic approach or methods for creating anything, for creating something new, or to enhancing an existing solution. So those are some of the core, I think, design perspectives. And then moving into applying those perspectives into our pedagogy, I turn to, here's the mini gesturing that I promised earlier, to instructional design, which is to use this design mindset from understanding to defining to inventing, testing, and implementing into our pedagogical instructional design process. How do we understand the needs and goals of teaching and learning? What are areas that needs to be defined for development or change? How do we invent or build on current content for teaching? How do we know if our ideas work? How do we test them? And how do we adjust based on feedback that we receive? And finally, how do we know the long-term or sustainable performance based on the design of our pedagogy? So I think the answer is in student-centered learning or student-centered, learner-centered pedagogy. So by learner-centered, here are some of the characteristics that I think are core to this approach. That is, first, that the student need should define the structure of learning, and that we should leverage peer-to-peer knowledge. And if any way possible, we should always prioritize self-directed learning as well as participatory assessment of learning. And finally, and this is sort of my own thinking about this, I think learner-centered pedagogy should treat every cohort of learners as unique. So how to do that, here are some questions, and specifically pertaining to AI and algorithmic or autonomous writing. So what students need to know, what are the assumptions and existing knowledge that is shared among students about AI writing tools? How can we create student-centered or student-driven writing and learning assessment? How do we adapt learning plans from one class or one cohort to another such that they are applicable and meaningful to those students? more conversations. I feel like I have more questions than answers for you here. What kind of questions do you want to answer, right? With yourself, how does generative AI fit within my own learning goals and objectives? With your students, you might want to talk about how students feel about writing and content design or communication in general. What fears or expectations do they have about AI writing tools? And with your institution, you may ask, if someone could help me with learning about generative AI, what if I want to learn the statistical model behind the generative process? Or simply, what are the ethics or responsible use of AI across industry? And then speaking of industry, how do you think people would use AI tools in the field? How might that affect their workflow and our teaching of that workflow through our classes? So this last part focuses on this particular design mindset that I draw from what is called design thinking. And these are the attributes of design thinking that I don't want to go into too much detail with. But essentially what it does is that it puts us into this human in the loop or human-centered perspective that is demonstrated here through this graphic here that you can see. Instead of having us revolving around a given technology and trying to adapt our practices, we should have technologies work for us. So technology should be designed to address human and our practical needs rather than having us change our ways of work. So think about, like, as writing teachers, technology should accommodate to our teaching needs and students' learning needs, rather than us trying to tweak technology in order to fit into existing ecologies of learning, i.e. the classroom or institutional requirements. So I mentioned human in the loop. So this is another sort of visualization of how human in the loop might look like. There's a lot of circles. You've just seen one. Here's another that looks at how human provide interactive feedback to AI systems so that it can produce what the human is asking, rather than providing it simply based on its trained model, which could lead to some of these ethical things that you have already considered earlier, like biases and inequity, misrepresentation, disinformation, so on and so forth. All right. This part is sort of like a how-to. So this is generated with my collaborators who co-authored the book called UX Writing. And this has some guidance on how to write prompts, at least for now, that works for generative AI platforms. Essentially, we have these categories that you could pay attention to, which you might recognize, that is sort of borrowed from the rhetorical situation, right? Thinking about audience, purposes, and the journalistic questions of what, when, why, how, right? Some parameters, tone, sources, data set, for example. So here's one instance. So in this prompt, we use action, parameters, genre, topic, tone, audience, and data set, right? To create instruction for an AI generator so that it can produce some kind of output that addresses this particular need, which is a Facebook post that is around 150 words on pet adoption that is addressing an older audience that draws from this particular website as the source. So with this input, I got something like this that spits out a very generic output that could be used. It follows the 150 word parameter, and the tone seems to work fine, at least based on what I've provided. So for students, then I teach them about the strategy of prompt reusing. So you either use the same prompt to regenerate an output that probably would land on something quite similar to what you already got, or you can put different variables, so the different categories that I mentioned earlier. Instead of an older adult, you can say a mature adult. Instead of a a warm and friendly tone, you can say a more informal tone, something like that. So you adjust your variables with the same intention, and you might get something that is slightly different. So instead of saying, hey, everyone, it says, hey, friends. So you might get a modified output from your generator. The other strategy that I teach them to use is called command stacking. So commands are prompts, I use them interchangeably. So prompts that provides new instructions to the AI writer. So instead of saying, write me a Facebook post, now maybe write me a tweet. Write, instead of 150 words, give me, 85 words with, so those are different genres and different parameters that you're creating now, rather than adjusting the command you're providing new command. So here's an example. Same input. Instead of Facebook, now it asks for a Twitter post, and it understands that Twitter refers to X. So there's this kind of historical understanding as well. And I asked it to replace older adults with seniors. And it does just that. It maintained everything else in the output. So just to quick summarize here, then here are some of the things that are, I think, influencing the way we talk about writing, especially with the integration, I think, of new technologies such as generative AI. Doesn't mean that these are the only things that we teach now in our writing, but just new awareness and literacy, if you will, although I have some reservation about using literacy to represent knowledge. So if we still, it's already the hour, but I have this one last part that I want to show you on how to apply the design thinking phases into creating heuristics for your teaching. If you don't mind, I think I would just need perhaps 5 minutes to walk through this, if that's okay. Cool. Thanks, Kay. So basically, if you do a quick Google search, you will see that design thinking is typically represented in these like phases. They are supposed to be non-linear. That means you can go back and forth throughout these phrases. You start with empathizing and then creating a defined statement that provides you with some kind of direction on ideation, and then prototyping of that idea that you can then later use to test. And based on the results of these different phases, you go back and forth. That's why it's called an iterative rather than a linear process for innovation. So in the instructional context, earlier I mentioned instructional design and human learner-centered design. So how can we then combine those things with a design thinking mindset into helping us address student needs pertaining to the application of AI in our classes? So with empathy stage, I think to understand people, you need to take action. So sometimes the design thinking framework advocates for storytelling, interviews, focus groups, surveys, and other ways that you can collect narratives about students' experiences in a particular scenario. So in this case, the use of AI tools in their learning. So questions such as, what do your students want to get out of using an AI tool in their learning would be a good starting point as a way of empathizing with their experience and needs. And the second phase on definition, we want to turn those narratives into actionable statements. So in UX, we call this the user story. So a user story is a structured template that provides you with these spaces that you can fill in that addresses the problem in this format. So the user needs or wants something in order to achieve something because they have this goal, but there might be certain barriers or challenges that are facing them. So in this earlier example, when we ask, what do your students want to get out of using AI tools in their learning, an example might be this, that Sam, who is a professional writing student, who is also a pre-med major in your class, wants to figure out Google Gemini's capacities in order to create a summary of an essay and create 3 keywords. But because Sam is not confident about their own summary ability, they worry that using AI is considered cheating, and they do not have access to the pro version of Gemini. because they're concerned about the quality of the free version, and they do not want to waste time correcting the output that they get from the AI. So based on these, we have something that we can work with in order to ideate some kind of actionable solution, right? So in the ideation phase is where we think about potential ideas or ways to address that Sam's situation here. In ideation, typically we want to make it as big and generative as possible. So we call it the radical ideation. So there, at this point, we're not really evaluating quality of ideas, but rather we want to get as many ideas as possible. So in this process, typically, when I teach design thinking, I have students generate as many crazy ideas as possible. So here I'm still being quite conservative with some examples that I'm putting out here. For example, asking a university to buy AI licenses, practicing writing summaries in the classroom, creating a cheat sheet for fact checking or checking for accuracy, organizing boot camps to train students how to write with AI, or ask Google to simply produce better AI and make it free for everybody, right? There could be other, of course, more radical ideas as well. The next phase then in design thinking is to create an actual tangible version of your idea so you can run it by actual users to get feedback. So in this case, an example might be an AI writing manifesto for your own professional writing students and your class. And you can then create as much details as possible around this particular idea, make it tangible so that you can move on to this next part of the activity, that is to test the idea. You never know until you actually put it out there to have people react to that particular idea. Sometimes people would also skip to the implementation stage instead of testing them. They combine them as rolling out and testing at the same time. They call it beta testing, right? The version 1.0 that is released and asking people to provide feedback as they use it and make iterations or improvement as they go. But the whole idea of this iterative process is to keep iterating, right? It's not staying at what the first version or the original idea might be. So that's that. I thought, oh, this is exactly 5 minutes to complete this. So that's good. I have more UX examples that I will let you poke around later on this slide deck. But basically, if you teach a technical writing class that has a UX component where students might engage with AI, I have them again walk through the different phases of design thinking, and they can use it to do specific UX design tasks like generating interview questions, creating user personas, journey maps, ideating solutions or creating features of a particular solution, prototyping wireframes, micro content or copy, translation even for those ideas, and then writing out test solutions. They have to run the test themselves, but they can get ideas for those tasks and scenarios that we use in testing, generating interview questions for test. And finally, my colleagues and I have also come up with a heuristic for this is not so much for teaching or for testing our ability to use AI, but rather testing the quality of the output. So we call it the heat test, which speaks to the mental models, the accuracy, the trustworthiness, and how much it mapped onto our actual human experience out in the world, and how those output is rated. So we have that article just released, and I've linked it here for PDF reading if you would like to use that. But I believe that's all. Thank you so much. And I've gone just a little bit over.